Hello, everyone, and welcome to From Our Perspective, Two Therapist Moms and a Mic. I'm Claudia Glassman.
And I'm Katie Truax.
And as we mentioned at the end of our last episode, today we are diving into parenting styles. Yes.
This is podcast number 5 for us, right? We started out with anxiety around parenting specifically. Then we segued into kind of like more of just a general primer on anxiety. Then we kind of talked about how that's related to these concepts of perfectionism, right?
Yes.
Both with and without parenting. And then last time we talked about kind of how that anxiety and perfectionism sometimes spins off of our own guilt and self-evaluation around how well we're doing, comparatively speaking, to our own beliefs about how we should be parenting based on our own experiences, either for better or for worse, from our own childhoods or the things we've learned. And then we kind of just naturally stumbled into this concept of parenting styles last time. So we thought we'd kind of pick up here today and talk about some of the more easily defined parenting styles and what those might look like.
That's right. So I remember, I guess it was in child development classes, right? That's probably where we learned this in graduate school, right? And we talked about, or we learned about more specifically, your 4 basic styles, which I think are, they're still around. And that has shifted kind of into these more specific ones, which we talked a little bit about in the last episode, was like attachment parenting and kind of these more like these newer parenting identities that have kind of evolved over time. So let's kind of do like just a really brief primer, I guess, in the 4 basic styles that I feel like are kind of encompass some of these more specific ones. So the first one we had was authoritative, right? So this is the parenting style where you're responsive to your child's needs, you're supportive of them, you nurture them, but you have firm limits. And so essentially it's this balance, right, of boundaries and limits and love and support. Then we had the authoritarian, which is, this is kind of how I picture like old school, I'm gonna call it old school parenting, but that kind of,
because I said so, that's why.
Because I said so, my children should fear me and respect me and just do what I say, right? The focus is on obedience and control of the child, right? Over building a relationship and comforting the child. So it's kind of this, I always imagine this like super old school, parent, like dad comes home and everyone's scared and running because he's like, gonna come in and consequence everyone. That's how I imagine it.
We saw this. We went to, we took a little mini vacation this past weekend and scooted away just one state over. And we did one day at an amusement park. And this amusement park had a water park as part of it. And I was observing a family and I was really like curious because the mom had a belt around her neck. And at first I thought that it was kind of like, oh shoot, we forgot to take your belt off. Here, just grab it to me before you get in the water park, right? Or water slide or whatever. But then I was like looking around, the kids, none of them had belt loops. They all had like regular swim trunks on. Then I was kind of observing people. It's a great place to people watch, and you're kind of noticing what people are doing. And, her facial expressions and the way she interacted with the children. And I guess the dad was there too. And it became apparent to me pretty quickly that it was there as a threat to the children.
And a reminder. Wears the belt all the time.
It was around her neck, like hung like like somebody would hang like a camera strap, or like it was like around the back of her neck. And it was a reminder of the impending punishment that would come should they get out of line.
Oh, that's intense.
That's a good example of authoritarian.
Yeah, that's that one. Wow, that's super all committed and intense.
Yeah.
So the polar opposite of that is permissive and or indulgent, right? That's kind of like you love your kids a lot, but you have no rules, no boundaries, no limits. really just, I guess, behaviorally, the kids kind of can do what they want, right? Um, kind of akin to being more of your child's friend, less of a parent. And then we were talking briefly about this one before we came on, uninvolved. I mean, and that's essentially neglectful, right? Like there's no parenting happening, there's no response to their children, maybe even rejecting their children. And kids are kind of left on their own to raise themselves and fulfill their own needs. That's kind of like, I think, what you and I see, when we're looking at, neglect and severe neglect in children.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note that some of this can be because people have intentionally made decisions about values and beliefs. I think some of this can come because of circumstances and situation, whether that is busyness or lack of resources, or even an overabundance of resources, or being stretched too thin mentally or emotionally, right?
Right.
We get robbed sometimes of our choice or our ability to either, figure out what we believe in and act accordingly when we're under pressure, right? When we feel like we have to do certain things, we might have to, or we might default to what might not be our ideal parenting style, right? So some of this comes out of truly like, this is how I believe children should be raised. And some of this sometimes is just a sign of our circumstances, if that makes sense.
That's right. That's right. And, you have these distinct four, styles, but I would argue that people move in between them. There are certain areas in which someone might be super permissive, right? Or times when they might be permissive. And then there's times when they're authoritative. And then there's times when they're just like an authoritarian because they've hit the wall, right? Or they've gotten to their limit or whatnot. So they don't all, they sound like they stand alone, but I feel like people can move in and out of them as well in any given moment.
I definitely think I do. I mean, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Somebody once told me there was this like slogan of this school that's around where we live, and it's a Montessori school, and the slogan is a hard line with a lot of love. And they said, Katie, I think that's how you parent. And I said, oh yeah, I like that so much. And I remember early on, somebody insinuated that I needed to tell my daughter no more. And I thought, well, you know what? I actually believe, right, with my brain and my education and my experience, that I would like to tell her yes as much as possible. But then when it's a no, it's a hard no. And it's a, not negotiable if it's a no, because I'm your mother and I said no, right? And I will usually explain why it's a no. And it's usually a no because of safety reasons or a health reason, right?
Yeah.
Or because of external circumstances, like I have to be at the office in 10 minutes. You have to get in the car now. This isn't negotiable.
Right.
Right. But that's definitely, I think, okay, maybe if I were going to have a median, it would be in the authoritative, right? But then, yeah, like, sure, I like to say yes, and that's more permissive. But then there are times when I'm the boss and it's a no, and that's more authoritarian, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, there's, I look at my parenting, there's things that I don't want to say don't care about, but I'm less passionate about, right? I have less of a hard stance on certain things. And then there's other things I have a very hard stance on, right? And it's like, if my kids bump up against one of those things that I have a harder stance on, they're going to get a harsher response maybe, right? However, I think, in general, I mean, in my house, there's always room for conversation, even if the conversation does not change the outcome. And most of the time for my kids, it doesn't. But you can tell me how you feel about it. And then I'm going to still say, well, I get it, but no. Right. Yeah. So as, life's kind of progressed and parenting's progressed, we have these other kind of styles that have popped up. And we talked a little bit about attachment parenting last time. I think we scraped the surface of it. And these, I kind of feel like these can fit into those other four categories, but I know, listeners hear these terms, so I figured we'd kind of dive into it. So attachment parenting is really focusing on that attachment piece with our children, right? So this nurturing, creating a strong connection, between the parent and the child with the goals of kind of raising a confident, mentally healthy, independent, empathetic, happy adult eventually. And then you see these come up a lot. I think it's interesting because I hear attachment parenting spoken a lot about in littles, right? Because it comes up a lot when we're talking about breastfeeding and extended breastfeeding or co-sleeping and baby wearing and kind of all these nurturing things that we do when they're little. I don't know if I hear a lot about it from people that have older children, although clearly it's still there. It exists, right? But it seems to be a focus on the younger years.
Well, yeah, and I think that there's a reason for that. I mean, and this is just my perspective, but I think that, so my understanding of attachment, right? And I'm kind of a brain geek. I actually almost decided to do neurobiology. I don't know if you knew that about me, rather than actually practice clinically as a therapist. But then I learned that I'd have to work on mice. And so that was like a deal breaker for me. So here I am. But I love the brain. And my earliest area of specialization as a clinician was in trauma. And there's so much really cool, interesting stuff that happens in the brain. I really loved learning a lot about those processes and trauma, and then anxiety disorders, and attachment disorders are all very kind of cousins to one another, right? And so attachment is a neurobiological process that happens, and you're much more up on the research than I am, but the last statistic I heard was that attachment was formed between 0 and 3. And so by 3, we had the child has developed a primary attachment style, and that basically it's a series of neural connections in the brain that kind of lives mostly in the limbic system, which is our animal brain, that is an answer to the big picture question of, are my needs going to be met? When I call, will somebody answer? If I fall, will somebody catch me? Another way I've heard this put is the world a safe place, right? Are relationships safe? Can I trust myself, and can I trust other people? And that there's a series of opportunities for these questions to be asked, obviously not verbally, but through circumstances, right? Between 0 and 3. And by 3, the jury's kind of made their decision in there. It's like a yes or a no, right? Or a sometimes. So if it's a yes, we have a secure attachment style. If it's a no, we have an anxious or an avoidant attachment style. And if it's a sometimes, we have an anxious avoidant, right? Or a combination or disorganized attachment style, where sometimes it's one way, or sometimes it's another, or sometimes it feels like there's a lot of internal conflict around attachment. Yes. But that might be part of why we don't hear as much about intentionally being attachment focused as the years progress, right? Because if it is true that has solidified by 3, it's kind of like, if we've done our job well, a securely attached child doesn't need to continue asking those questions. It's only if we need to do some corrective work that we would really have to be diligent and conscious about revisiting that as kids move into the older ages.
Yes, I agree with you. I think that's where the focus is. Just developmentally, those younger years are more formative, make more sense. And from an attachment perspective, and those formative first, few years where the attachment style and that feeling of safety comes from, knowing that's the critical component and the critical time frame. That's kind of where that emphasis is. However, I would argue that attachment injuries can happen past that point. And there are things that can happen that can throw someone for a loop, even though they had a specific attachment style. Now, some of those things can be kind of like traumas, but traumas happen in a lot of different ways, right? Sometimes it's just life, losing a parent, for example, right? So I would argue that we are not safe from attachment injuries, even though we're older. But I think the focus of attachment parenting shifts, right? The focus always remains on the connection and the relationship with the child. My kids are obviously past this 3 years old phase, But even now, I mean, when I parent from the perspective, kind of like this overarching thing of what do I want my children to be like as adults, right? And what do I want my relationship to look like with them? And so I think attachment parenting kind of morphs into this like parenting within the relationship concept.
Mhm.
And I don't really think there's another category for that. So I would argue it kind of just kind of morphs, but continues, right? Focus less on basic needs and the initial attachment connection, and then it shifts into maintaining that relationship.
Yeah.
So it becomes open communication, conversations, validating feelings, right? Like setting limits, but not doing it in like a punitive, aggressive way, right? And it looks a little different. I know this came up last time, and I know I hear it from people, and I'm sure you do too, that sometimes they feel like attachment parenting is permissive parenting.
Mhm.
And that there's a lack of limits or a lack of boundaries.
Mhm.
I think some of that comes from those first 3 years, right? Because what those look like is, in order for our children to feel safe, we respond to their cries, right?
Yeah.
So if they're hungry, we feed them. If they need to be held, we hold them, right? We feed into all of the needs. We meet all of the needs of this little person so that they learn someone's there for them, the world's safe. And I think people kind of take that out of the first 3 years and assume that then that's always the case, that anytime your child wants something, you meet that.
Well, but let me pause you there for a second, because you just shifted your word, and this might be the differential factor here, right? As the baby, we meet the need.
That's right.
Right. And I bet you or I would say, well, even if our 8, 9, 10-year-olds had a need, or my 23-year-old had a need, I would meet the need.
Correct.
Right. But the needs diminish as the age progresses. And so do we meet all their wants? Hell no.
Right. But you meet their needs. Yeah.
Right. And that would be more of like that permissive parenting style of like just giving in to every whim or want from the child. And that's not what attachment parenting is supposed to be, as we like work towards, growing our children. Right.
Mm.
Like, and we stay focused on the need, but it doesn't mean giving in to every want.
That's right. And it's identifying the need in the mess. And this is what I work a lot with, whether I'm working with kids or I'm doing parenting support, is we get like bogged down in a child's behavior, right? They're whining, they're doing this. And it's like, okay, but what's the need under that? And so, right, you have the behavior that you're annoyed with and trying to change. Like, what's the need? Because the needs are always valid. I mean, I, as a full grown adult capable of managing myself, need attention. I do, right? I need connection. I need love. I need affection. I need so sometimes we get like, oh, the kid's so needy, right? They need a hug again. Like, yeah, they need a, right? And so a lot of attachment parenting is understanding that your child, preteen, teenager, partner, right? Whoever has needs, and that you're willing to meet those within the relationship. But that doesn't mean you meet every want, desire, or demand.
That's right. And that's so key. I think that's so key, right? And maybe it could just be that simple, of paying attention to the need, but not giving into every want, desire, demand, right? Particularly if it either is contrary to what they need, right? Like, I mean, our kids probably are at these phases where they want to stay up really late, right? But I know for my kid, that's usually not what she needs. My child needs a lot of sleep. And so one of the tasks that we're negotiating now is bedtime, right? Around, okay, it's legitimate that you want to stay up later. And she looks around and sees a lot of her friends staying up later, and everybody's body is different. And my body is a body that needs a lot of sleep. So she gets it on a sleep too from me. And my kid's always been the kid where she doesn't sleep in. Like, if she doesn't like go to bed at her normal time, if she goes to bed later, then she just wakes up at the same time. She's just like a mess the next day,
Yeah.
And so if she wants to stay up later, then okay, balancing the want and the need, right? What you need to sleep because your body needs to rest, you need to heal, you need to recuperate, you need to be prepared for tomorrow so you have a good day tomorrow. And finding that balance, right? That's that authoritative, I always get those two mixed up with my words. Authoritative, right? That negotiation. And with kids, our kids' ages, we can have those conversations, right? And sometimes that might look like with a younger kid, what might feel like more authoritarian of saying, no, it's bedtime. We're not negotiating this. Go to bed, right? At 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, where we know that we're still meeting their need. And so therein, it is attachment parenting that could look like anything along that, permissive, authoritarian, authoritative spectrum, if you will, which is kind of interesting.
Right. And I think it's, again, approaching your child as though they are a whole human, which they are, but we often don't treat children that way, right? This approach of like, they have thoughts, feelings, just like you do, opinions, right? And so sometimes kind of what's thrown in there more than maybe in the other parenting styles is like a validation of feelings. But again, that doesn't mean you give in to them. It would be so much fun to stay up later, but our bodies need rest and it's bedtime. You didn't change the bedtime. You just let them know that, yeah, sometimes going to bed early sucks and I get it, but you're still going to do it.
Right.
Right. And so it frustrates me a little when I hear that people view it as really permissive. And again, how these are all executed, varies greatly. It really ends up being like a hodgepodge of parenting styles, but it does frustrate me because I think executed well and with limits and boundaries, you can set limits calmly, right? You can set limits, strong limits, without being punitive, mean, and shaming. But there's a nuance to it. And I know last time we talked a little bit about, and this is where I think my clients get a little, because I actually do a lot of work with parents on like, what is your philosophy of parenting? And let's sort it out. Because what I have noticed is when we don't know for ourselves how to verbalize why we're doing what we're doing, it's hard to stay the course. And it's really hard when you get feedback from everyone, right? Like you got the feedback from people, you should say no more, right? But you can say, well, this is why I'm doing X, Y, and Z. Right. This is my belief. This is this is how I want to do it. This is why I'm doing this. But I know I work a lot with clients about sorting out what makes sense to them, right? Based on their own experiences. And sometimes it's, well, as a child, I felt like I was always bad. And I don't want my kid to feel that way. And then the work is, okay, so that's something that's important to you, to not have your child feel that pain that you had, that something was always wrong with you, right? You were always too much this or too much that, or naughty or not listening, or whatever the verbiage was, right? How do you do that but still set limits, right? Because the challenge is, do you then become too permissive because you never want them to feel that way, but you don't know how to execute limits in a way that won't elicit that feeling.
Totally.
Right. And so, I mean, it's super nuanced, but I don't know. I feel like my parents just parented. Like, I mean, some of it's like we have a lot more information. There's obviously been a lot more research in recent years on parenting styles, and honestly, even just on attachment in general. Right. And brain development and children has been studied more. Maybe we have too much information, I don't know, but I feel like there's definitely trends in parenting, right, that shift over time.
So what are you seeing now? Because, I mean, admittedly, my information is outdated, right? I mean, I was trained in the 3 models of parent education that I was trained to teach, gosh, 12, 15 years ago, right? So talk about research, right? What's new? I mean, you hear these things about helicopter parenting and attachment parenting, and I don't know what else is out there, because I tend to be somewhat disconnected from pop culture and from research. I don't know what that says about me, but I live in my little bubble. But like, what are the trends, Claudia? What are you seeing in your clients? What are you seeing in the research?
Yeah, I mean, I think helicopter parenting is a real thing. I don't know if that's a complete parenting philosophy or more of a behavior of parents. That's a trend, right? This idea that we're going to hyper focus on everything about our child and orchestrate, navigate, and control like all aspects closely, right? We're monitoring that closely, kind of not giving them freedom to be necessarily, but again, with the best intention. I think that comes from anxiety, right? This idea of if they're out there on their own, are they safe, right? And
Or
this,
even in the home, right? I mean, I've seen like, oh, don't run. Oh, you can fall. Oh, be careful. Like,
right.
oh, no, like
That's right.
teach your 2-year-old that like they should be careful, like to that degree, like walking down the hall. Is that something that we need to really be scared of, and these early messages that you give? But
Yeah.
this is a piece too, though, I think, and I've seen this in my own household. I think that helicopter parenting can come out of a love language, which is really an interesting thing because my husband helicopter parents, and we joke, and we sometimes can joke with him more than others because sometimes it can be sensitive for him. But we even have like, we'll say like, but for him, he's a doctor and he's such a nurturer, like he through and through, he's a caregiver, and he does not have anxiety. He's actually probably one of the most like even keeled, like laid back, relaxed humans on the planet. But his love language is acts of service. So you take this like true, like tried and true doctor nurturer who truly, one day he told me he'd done a personality test that told you what kind of animal you would be, and it came back that he was a golden retriever because all he really wanted to do was like just lay at your feet and make you happy.
I can see it. I can see it.
Yeah, you know my husband well.
Yeah.
So like that's his personality. And then his love language is acts of service, like doing things for other people is what makes him feel like he is showing love. And so what that looks like is him doing things for his family, right? And so for Ellie, who's a very fierce, independent, strong-willed Leo redhead who has a lot of fire like her mama, sometimes that like feels like an affront to her, right? And we've had to work on like teaching her how to like use her words to say like, Daddy, I was doing that, or Daddy, I can do it myself, or I don't need your help right now, Daddy, or like, I got this. She'll say her first phrase was actually, I got this at 2 years old. And it's still a very common phrase in our household, right? And because he just very naturally wants to do for as a way of showing love, right? So I think it's both. I see it a lot as a manifestation of fear and anxiety, whether it's because, going back to our podcast last time, right? Like we grew up in a scary situation ourselves and don't want our children to get hurt, right? Whether it's trauma or tragedy or abuse, or we're just maybe predisposed to anxiety. And God knows our environment these days. I had a client tell me just this morning or this afternoon that the stuff that's happening in the media right now is really starting to affect their comfort level. And I had somebody tell me last week they're afraid to even take their child to Publix, because of some of the things that are in the news right now. And, so that anxiety can come from lots of places. And then I think the helicopter parenting sometimes can just come from good old genuine, maybe over nurturing.
Yeah. Right. Like just a deep care, right? For wanting the best for your child. And I think, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think the problem is when the child is debilitated by your hovering. I also think like, I think someone just posted something about, they do like college counseling for like applications and stuff, like they'll help with essay writing and test prep and all this stuff. And their whole thing was, because the college application process isn't what it used to be. And I was talking to friends about this weekend, and I am not a great standardized test taker. And I'm a highly competitive person, apparently, unless it comes to test taking, because I kind of took my SATs and was it the GMATs for grad school? Yeah. And I got what I got, and I applied to school and was like, they take me or they don't. Thank goodness they took me. But my test scores are garbage. Okay. And we were talking about the college process and how things are so different and how you start junior year and you better have all these conversations. And so like, I was acutely aware of the pressures that parents start to feel trying to just give their kids, I don't know, what I felt like was a chance, right? Like for the next step in life. And so I think that also compounds to us orchestrating for them, right? Like starting at 7, like what college are they going to go to, and what school should we enroll them in, and what activities should we do? Because apparently, like, you now have to orchestrate your pre-college resume to make you stand out and all of this other stuff. And I think some of it comes from us hearing those messages, or maybe those realities. I don't know, I'm not there yet. And then saying, well, what can we do to help our kids so that they can fulfill their dreams? Right. But it's easy to kind of, it's a slippery slope. You start going down and all of a sudden you're orchestrating every aspect of your kid's life with the best intentions.
Yeah. Right. And obviously, I mean, as you guys are listening, like, we don't have the answers to this, you guys. I think like a lot of it is about intentionality, and I remember even when our kids were younger, we would have these conversations around watching them and watching how they're developing, and knowing that every child has a different innate way of that they arrive into the world, right? Before you have any opportunity to screw them up, and that some of that is, well, that's, I guess at that point, it's all their genetics. And then, ideally we did an okay job of carrying them in utero, right? As far as our nutrition and are managing our stress levels and all that kind of a jam, right? And then they show up in this world, and then we just pay attention and see, how are they doing, right? Is he or she too much of certain thing or too little of another thing, right? And I remember maybe we had more time when they were younger, and we were more intentional about asking each other about these things, or maybe we're just busy, or now we don't have as many of these conversations with each other. But I remember, like, okay, well, independence, is she independent enough, right? Which is a sign of secure attachment. But does she know that we're here when she needs us? And is she opinionated enough but also kind to other people, right? Is she cautious and wise but not afraid of her world, right? Is she self-sufficient but able to ask for help when needed, right? And finding these balances within our kids, and then knowing if there's something that seems to be a little bit out of whack, well, what can we do to encourage bringing that back to center, right? Whether it's giving a little more of something or giving a little less of something. And I think that can be so valid even as kids age, and as they age we have less control and less control and less control. But watching to see, how much do I intervene? How much do I influence? And how much do I, stay out of things, right? And let them experience their own worlds. And again, we could tie that back into that spectrum of permissive, authoritative, authoritarian, right?
Yeah.
As they get older.
Yeah. I mean, and that balance is kind of what we strive for, and probably have to continuously calibrate to try to meet, right? Because again, we're human with our own stuff. We don't want our kids to experience certain things. No one wants their child hurt, sad, angry. The mama bear in me comes out too, where I would love to fight a fight for my kid. And I think it's coming back to what I find helpful is to always step back and say, what kind of adult do I want my kid to be? What kind of relationship do I want to have with my children? And in kind of looking past today's drama or today's conflict or today's parenting issue of the very moment, right? How do I get there? Right. And that looks different. How people answer that question is very different for everyone, right? The goals I have for my children are pretty basic, like don't be a jerk, be independent, and hold your own in life. Kind of my, like basic goals. But someone else may have very different goals for their children, right? And so I kind of try to always keep that in mind or check myself against that, because if I want an independent child, I need to let them practice independence in my home. What that looks like on any given day is different, but it helps me keep into check when I'm reacting just out of anxiety, or when I'm reacting out of control, or when I'm reacting because I feel like that's what I should be doing. Because you and I do this for a living in terms of working with clients that obviously were children at one point and had their own experiences growing up. I work with parents, but I'm not immune to feeling pressure. When Kenzie had a raging meltdown in the middle of Target and people are staring at me, I was like, oh my God, what do people think right now?
Right.
And then I was like, I don't care, but I do, but I don't, but oh my God, are they judging me? I feel it too. And so I have to check myself against standards too. So when I hear someone say you should say no to your kids more often, for a brief second, I'm like, do I need to? Right. And then I have to bring it back to what's my vision and what's important to me and what works for me and what works for my kids, and kind of bring it back to my little bubble, because it's hard to navigate. It is. And, I think from a mental health perspective, you look at these 4 styles, and the authoritarian, yes, is, see, I get them mixed up too. Authoritarian style, right? Where you're balanced with meeting their needs, offering nurture, and providing boundaries.
You did get it mixed up. That's authoritative.
Authoritative, correct. Right, is the quote unquote ideal. But again, I think we're all a little bit of a hodgepodge of everything. You catch me when I'm stressed out and my limits have been maxed, I might lean and dip a little bit into a different temperament, right? But I think it's about, really kind of making sure you're focusing on the things that are important to you and the goals that are important to you. And then everything kind of starts to fall into place. I feel that's kind of the best way to approach it.
And making sure that those goals and the values are coming from your highest self, right? From a self that is somewhat healed and evolved from any past childhood traumas or tragedies that you might have gone through, so that we're not reacting out of avoidance or a fight or flight or freeze mentality. And that we're not parenting being triggered, but that we're actually coming up with those values and those systems from a grounded, centered place. And that's sometimes where working with a therapist can be helpful, is therapists get to know like our clients, and we know their past and we know their profiles, and we can listen out for those little red flags that say, I think that might have been because your mom did it too much this other way, and that felt really bad to you.
Yeah.
Right. And is this truly in your highest good? Is this truly in the highest good of your children to go 180 degrees in the opposite direction?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, right. And is it truly what you in your gut believe your children need and believe you should be doing, or is it just in response to not doing it this way?
Yep.
And I don't know what other way to do it, so I'm going to, do the opposite.
Yep.
Yeah. I really don't think my parents thought this much about parenting.
No.
No. Like, I think they just, threw some spaghetti on the wall and saw it stuck.
Yeah.
And here's the reality. In the end, we're all going to mess up at some point. We're all going to, not parent the way we imagine in our minds. 100%. We're all going to mess up, and our kids will be okay.
Yep.
And they will, have conversations about that with their friends. But, I think it's, giving yourself some grace that you're learning in this journey just as much as your kids are learning in theirs. Yeah.
Well, maybe that's what we can come back to, is this idea of like, well, how do we know, right? How do we know when we screw up, are our kids going to be okay? Right. And how do we make sure that that's the case? Ooh, is that a deep topic?
That's a loaded topic.
Woo-hoo-hoo.
But I do think it would be fun I think it'd be fun. Maybe everyone else is like, not fun. I don't know. But really, maybe we can kind of dive into, our own stuff as adults, and maybe, the beginnings of some of those things, right? Which we kind of alluded to here, is we do parent sometimes in opposition to what we experienced. Sometimes we parent in alignment with what we experienced, right? But we all kind of, and I talk to clients a lot about their experiences as a child, because it does impact your parenting. Those hurts we have as a kid, which none of us escape childhood without any hurts, because we're human and our parents are human. But how do those play a role in our adult relationships and our parenting? Right. Oh, that'd be interesting to me. Everyone else is like, nope.
Adult attachment styles, maybe.
Oh, that'd be fun.
Reactions.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's pause for today, because I think I have a delightful couple in my waiting room that I'm supposed to go see.
You know what I love, real quick? I love that you end this the way you end therapy sessions. I always feel like I'm about to end a therapy session. Let's pause here, and next time we'll talk about
I know. Once a therapist, always
when you work with Katie.
That's right. Sorry, guys.
All right. Well,
That's true.
until next time, everyone.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.